Kia ora hui tātou katoa. Can I firstly acknowledge my colleague and Associate Minister, Tariana. I hope everybody appreciates just how much energy and effort she puts into her advocacy around housing for Māori. Obviously this event today is a consequence of her energy and effort, but also more broadly in terms of the ambitions that she and her party has for improving housing for Māori as an important part of the government's agenda. I want to talk more broadly about what's the government up to in the housing space and what are our overall ambitions of what we're attempting to achieve. The first thing is, in our view, the access to housing and what we do collectively in this space has a huge impact on us wanting to achieve our broader goals. Even today, the Reserve Bank Governor has again made plain that if we can't get the policy settings right in the housing space, that there are major negative economic consequences for New Zealand, or in his language, housing is one of the real risk areas for New Zealand's economic recovery. Equally, if you look in terms of the government's social goals, and whether it be the issues of damp, cold houses and the impacts on things like rheumatic fever, school achievement, all of those things, and the work of the Child Poverty Action Group and their recommendations around what housing means in the social space, just reinforces the importance of work that we're attempting to do in government, but I know all of you at the grassroots are also focused on. So my first key message is this stuff matters a lot to New Zealand's broader success story. The second is around the biggest change that we are wanting to make in the way in which New Zealand has dealt with social housing in more than a generation. If you look around the world and you look at the social housing component, sure, the state has a role, but the state's not at all. Where in the New Zealand story, actually state housing or social housing is predominantly delivered by the state. And we want to change that. And I want to talk to you a little bit about how, because it does require major fresh thinking from both government and from the community end. So in the budget, one of the key changes we made is the access for the income-related rent subsidy for not just the government. And sounds easy to say, it's very significant. Let me tell you how it works. For those people that live in a state house, they pay for a rent that is significantly less than the market rent, what they can afford. The government pays Housing New Zealand $650 million each year for the difference between the income-related rent and the market rent. What we've announced in the budget is that difference, that subsidy, will be available to approved community social housing providers. Now, why is that a key change? Well, if you as a iwi or hapu went out there right now and said that you were going to provide housing for our most needy families, you would conclude that, rightly so, it is very difficult financially to make it stack up. Because you all know, and we all know, that the most needy people are those that are least able to pay a fair rental for that accommodation, and it becomes very difficult for iwi to be able to finance those. But with the government now saying that we will pay the difference between that income-related rent and the market rent as a subsidy to alternative providers, we are opening the door for a real opportunity for iwi and community providers of social housing. And that is quite deliberate. Let me tell you why. If there's anything that whānau ora, and which, I won't say it, lecture us, Tariana, advise us wisely, is that if you're going to make gains, you can't think of people's needs in silos. It's not just about an education need or a health need or a housing need or a welfare need or whatever. If we're going to make real gains as a country and do better, we actually have to wrap those services far better. And that is where our view as a government, both the Māori Party and National, is the strength of having community social housing providers is that they're able to provide a lot more of the wraparound services that family needs than just the house that you can get from Housing New Zealand. So the broad objective that we have set is to expand the community social housing sector up to about 20% of New Zealand's social housing. That's a pretty audacious goal. That is talking about taking a sector that at the moment is probably 2,000 or 3,000 houses up to more like 15,000 to 20,000 houses. How are we going to deliver that growth? Well, the first thing is that the government established the Social Housing Fund, and a portion of that has been specifically ring-fenced for Māori initiatives. And we are progressively, in fact, in the next financial year, there will be more social houses funded as a consequence of grants through the Social Housing Fund than there has ever been in New Zealand history. We're expecting about 400 to be built around New Zealand. So for direct capital funding, we're also assisting the growth of that sector. The more challenging area is actually exploring directly transferring houses from Housing New Zealand to iwi and community providers. That's a pretty complex and challenging job, I might say. You should respect that Housing New Zealand is the Crown's biggest asset. Take everything across the board, Housing New Zealand's asset base is about $15 billion. And so the way in which we organise the transfer of those assets to other social and iwi providers of community housing is one of the issues that myself and Tariana and the team are working on. Now, Australia is a long way ahead of us. They started down this journey 15, 20 years ago. In July, I'm going with the Chief Executive of Housing New Zealand to look at how we get the detail of that right. And I look forward to having a discussion around different parts of the country, as I've already started with a number of iwi, around how we might be able to transfer some of that stock into the sector. The last point, and probably the more controversial part of the government's social housing reforms, is focused on saying our social housing must be for those that have the highest need. The truth is that people's needs are changing all the time. And in my view, it is wrong that we have got some families that had a high need 10 years ago who got into a state house continuing to occupy it when there are other families with a higher level of need. And that is why we are also introducing reviewable tenancies in a sensible and practical way, and I don't want to create unnecessary unease, but it is all about trying to make sure that those with highest need are those that are receiving the access to the social housing. The other big challenge that's related to that is the major reforms of Housing New Zealand itself. Housing New Zealand has a stock that was designed when we had everybody with wanting a 3-bedroom house. And so we've got a whole lot of 3-bedroom state houses that are half empty and a whole lot of others that are overcrowded. And that is why, for instance, if you look at the changes that we're making in Auckland, we have announced this program called 324 and 325, is actually on a massive scale adding 3,000 bedrooms onto existing state houses to try and reduce overcrowding. And at the other same time, building 500 infill houses on existing state house properties to try and get more of the 1s and 2s so that Housing New Zealand's houses look a bit more like the diversity of housing need that our community has today. In Christchurch, we're taking a different approach, the reality of the earthquakes, where we've got 5,000 severely damaged houses, is again to try and reconfigure that stock. We're actually demolishing some of the old 3-bedroom houses that are not really what we need and would cost $150,000 to repair, and instead replacing them with 2 4 and 5 bedroom units to better match need, because that's the more sensible way economically for us to reconfigure the stock in that city. The other point is that in a number of our rural and provincial areas, Housing New Zealand has more housing stock than it actually needs. And a further piece of work is going to be, well, how does Housing New Zealand divest of those properties and reinvest that capital into the place where housing need is the highest, and what's the space for some changes in that area as well. If there is a conversation again that I'd be wanting to have with iwi around New Zealand, is how might we partner in terms of improving home ownership. I come from a very strong social ethic that says that when people own their own home, they have a far greater stake in their community, and there is a whole lot of other benefits that flow from it. Home ownership rates in New Zealand have been declining for 25 years. We're going to need to do more things to try and make it easier for New Zealanders to be able to step up and own their little piece of this wonderful country that we share. So in big picture terms, I'm wanting to achieve a goal of more houses, but in the mix of houses that we have, I'm wanting to have more homes privately owned, owner occupied, less homes privately tenanted, more homes owned by community organisations, and less homes ultimately is likely in respect of those held by Housing New Zealand. The last point I want to make is in respect of the special housing areas and accords legislation that is before Parliament, and this morning was meeting with Mayor Len Brown and some of the challenges there. What the government's concern in this space is that particularly the Resource Management Act and land regulation has worked against the interests of making housing affordable. The little story that really got up my nose was of a person who had bought a block of rural land just outside of Auckland for about $890,000, who's done absolutely nothing with that land, but it's now got a value of $112 million because it just happens to be inside the metropolitan urban limit that's been arbitrarily set by the council. Now, who pays for that is that if the land price in a city like Auckland is so astronomically high, then that means the section price when it goes through subdivision is going to be incredibly high, and the average section price in Auckland right now is $325,000. You're not going to build an affordable home on a $325,000 section, and as the Productivity Commission correctly reported, that means that we're only building new houses for the very top end of the market, and that's leaving tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders locked out of the housing market. So we've come to an accord with the Auckland Council. It's about getting some pace around opening up new land as well as infill housing so that we can increase supply. We've got a pretty ambitious goal of 39,000 new houses in the city of Auckland over the next 3 years. It's going to require a huge amount of goodwill and grunt for us to be able to meet those goals, but in my view it's absolutely crucial in terms of those broader issues that I've spoken of. Thank you again for the invitation. Thank you for being part of the seminar today. I am more excited about the opportunities for us to lift our game in respect of housing policy than my entire period that I have been in Parliament. The foundation work both from the social housing reforms and the Productivity Commission give us an opportunity to make a real difference for the communities that we serve, and I look forward to working with my officials to deliver the sort of housing that will make a difference for the communities that you represent. Thank you very much.